All right, so we had some snapping going on over here. I don't know what happened. We have all the high schoolers over here, but they didn't catch on. I don't know what's going on. Maybe next week you got a couple more chances to do that, and then we're going to move on to a series, What Makes You Cranky? No, you don't need a series on that, do you? Okay, well, we are in the middle of the movie, you might say. We love to do series, but it's like a really long message. And instead of keeping you for 5 or 6 hours, we have mercy and break it up into half-hour segments. So we are in part 3 of our series, What Makes You Happy? In week 1, we talked about we discovered together that happiness has way more to do with a who than a what. And then last week, we looked at the principles that lead to happiness. And in Jesus' most famous sermon, he gives us these principles. And so if you missed those messages, I would encourage you to go to our YouTube channel, The Crossing Fellowship, and you can watch those there. So today, I want to talk about these two words right here, pleasure and happiness. Pleasure and happiness and the relationship of those two. And what's so interesting, when I was growing up, it was like, you had a choice. You could either, go down the God path or you could go down the fun path, but you couldn't go down both, right? I mean, it was holy or happy, one or the two. And many, go down that happy path, and then they realize it's not nearly as happy as they thought it was, and they're a little disillusioned, and maybe that's where you find yourself this morning. Maybe that's why you're here, or you're checking things out online, or maybe you're coming back for the first time. But God created us with the capacity for both of these things. But if we don't look at them correctly, they will lead us into trouble. And to kind of set up with where we're going to go today, I want to drop into a conversation that Jesus was having, and John records it for us. And so we drop right into this conversation in John chapter 10, verse 10. Jesus says, the thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. Now, whenever I have heard this taught, the thief was always referenced as the devil. Now, although I think that's very applicable, and I think you could certainly extract that out of this verse, it's actually not the context. If you would go and look at the context, we encourage you to do so in John 10:10, maybe this afternoon. The context of the thief is anyone, including ourselves, that we allow to come into our life that ends up stealing, killing, and destroying a part of our life. Anyone or anything that we allow to come into our life that steals, kills, or destroys a part of our life. And usually, I don't know if, we don't ever want to admit this, but have you ever thought about who has the greatest capacity in your life to steal something from you, to kill something in you, or to destroy something in you? Don't throw an elbow at your spouse at this moment. That would not be a great idea. See, we have the person in the mirror, the person that I look at every single morning in the mirror. I have more capacity to be my own worst enemy than anyone else. It's so extraordinary. I have the capacity to steal from myself. I can easily be my own thief. And I don't think I really purpose it, but I end up stealing, killing, and destroying myself. Sometimes it's other people, and certainly the devil can use all of those things. So I think the greater context is certainly there, that they come to steal, kill, and destroy. And the reason I would say that we oftentimes can become our own thief and we can become our own worst enemy is, isn't it true that you're the one who bought it? You're the one who leased it? You're the one who ate it. You're the one who drank it. You're the one who smoked it, snorted it, whatever it is that you do with it. You're the one who dated it. and then you slept with it, and some of you married it, right? So we have the capacity to be our own worst enemy. But then Jesus continues. He's like, the thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. But my purpose, one of the reasons I have come, and the reason I'm inviting you to follow me, my purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. Now, this is not this rich and satisfying life, that is not my favorite translation. I think it does capture the energy of the Greek word, but unfortunately, in our American culture, we read this as, oh yeah, sign me up for that. I follow Jesus, I'm going to get rich and I get to be lazy. Awesome. I'll follow him anywhere. That's not it. Okay? The NIV is to have life that's full. I don't think that captures the energy. So if you go clear back to the New American Standard or the King James, you will find it to have life abundant. I think that captures the energy of it way better. My purpose, Jesus says, is that you would have life and you would have it abundantly. So this Greek word that is translated rich and satisfying life or life to the full or abundant life, you will see those different translations. It means pertaining to that which is not ordinarily encountered. You just don't see it much. Jesus is like, hey, you want to have a life that's not ordinarily encountered? You want to have a life that people look at and you're like, man, you just don't see that every day. Man, I envy that. Boy, I wish I could have that. I don't believe everything they believe, but man alive, those Jesus followers, they just seem so at peace. They just seem so happy. I don't know if I believe the whole thing, but man, I want them to work for me. I'd love it if, they would marry my daughter. It's a life that's just not ordinarily encountered. And Jesus is inviting you and he's inviting me into a life that very few people actually get to enjoy. And the entire world and the entire culture is like, no, it's over here, it's over here, it's over here. And the wide road leads to there, and there's many who are following it. And yet if you would actually be fair-minded and you take a look at where everyone is going, I can't for the life of me figure out why there isn't a happy celebrity. It's just amazing how many are messed up. They have everything in our minds, right? Because happiness isn't nearly about a what as much as it is about a who. So, to have a life that is not ordinarily encountered, Jesus says, I'm going to invite you into that, but you're going to have to trust me. You're going to have to trust me. See, I am the good shepherd, he says, and he's like, you have a tendency to be your own worst enemy. I know I created you, and so I know that you know what? You tend to want to take it off of the rails. But I'm a shepherd, and we need a shepherd, not just a shepherd. We need a good shepherd who's going to lead us to life, to an abundant life, a life that's rich and satisfying, a life that's full, a life that isn't ordinarily encountered. The good shepherd, how do we know, Jesus, that you're good? Well, the good shepherd sacrifices his life for the sheep. If you're wondering, and maybe you went away because you're just not sure you trust Jesus, not sure about the whole deal, you just need to know, anyone who is willing to sacrifice their own life for you is for you. And no matter what has happened in your life, and no matter, the circumstances that you would look at and you say, I'm not sure that God is for me. I can't know that I can trust that God is for me, and what in the world's going on. You just need to know that anyone who is willing to sacrifice their life for you is for you. And no matter what has happened in your life, and no matter, the circumstances that you would look at and you say, I'm not sure that God is for me. I can't know that I can trust that God is for me, and what in the world's going on. You just need to know that anyone who is willing to sacrifice their life for you is for you. It's for you. But there's something in this verse that's really offensive. Did you catch it? He sacrifices his life for the what? The sheep. That's not very nice. I don't know. See, we are kind of removed from sheep. Our culture is. When I was growing up, there was a lot more sheep around. In fact, I showed sheep when I was in 4-H, and I should have confirmed this with my mom, but I didn't. I don't know if I volunteered to show sheep in 4-H or if I was voluntold that I will show sheep in 4-H, but regardless, sheep are the dumbest animals on the planet. It's unreal. It's just like, and Jesus, says that we're sheep. That's offensive. That's really offensive. Until you realize, okay, yeah, you bought it, I bought it, you leased it, you ate it, you drank it, you smoked it, you dated it, and you're glad there's no more room on the screen or I could keep going. Right? It's kind of like, yeah, I can be my own worst enemy. And earlier in our series, we talked about the fact that not only can we become our own worst enemy, but sin separates. And you could take your version of sin. If you're a Jesus follower, you should take, the New Testament's version of sin. If you're not a Jesus follower, you could just take the broad thing of, hey, you have your own standard. You have some things that you think someone else shouldn't do that. You have some things that you would say, I shouldn't do that. But then you do. That's sin. Okay? Sin separates. It separates everything. In fact, you could say that sin has come along and it steals, it kills, and it destroys everything that it comes into contact with. So, how does all of that in this backdrop have anything to do with pleasure and happiness? Because God created us all with the capacity to enjoy both of these things. Did you know that God created sexual pleasure? Towards the end of creation, he's just like, oh, I got a great idea. The angels are like, well, what is it? And they're like, you wouldn't understand. See, all you that just snickered, you know a little bit about angels, don't you, huh? Those of you that don't are going to have to ask someone who does, all right? So, the angel's like, we don't get it. We don't understand. He's like, oh, they're going to love it, but it's going to get them in a lot of trouble. A lot of trouble. Did you know that Jesus' first miracle, he what? His first miracle was he made wine. Jesus. He's like, hey, let's get this thing started. I'm going to do my first miracle. What are you going to do? I'm going to make wine. Are you sure? Maybe you should heal someone. No, I'm going to make wine. Okay. That seems kind of crazy, but okay. See, God created us with the capacity for both of these. The problem comes in priority. When we prioritize pleasure over happiness, we get neither. And if you're like, I'm not sure about that I'm not sure about that. So just hold on. See, when we actually prioritize happiness over pleasure, when we apply and submit to the principles that Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount that leads us to happiness, happiness will lead us to pleasure. In fact, I would say that happiness, if you would submit to those principles that lead to happiness, it will lead you to ultimate pleasure. But when you prioritize pleasure over happiness, you ultimately get neither. One leads to the other, but the other ultimately will undermine the one. Did you catch that? Did you catch that? You're like, no, explain that. See, one leads to the other, but the other ultimately will undermine the one. When you come home at night, just a glass of wine, it just helps me relax. It's great. So good. And then all of a sudden the glass doesn't really do it for you. All of a sudden it needs to be a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. And pretty soon you're bringing the six-packs home, and pretty soon, the beer doesn't really even do it. It's got to be something a little bit harder than that. And then pretty soon, whenever it calls, you obey it. And pretty soon you kind of have to have it on you at all times, but you kind of have to conceal it, don't you? Because you don't want anyone to know. Some of you guys, you could appreciate a beautiful woman. But then all of a sudden it's like it's not enough just to appreciate it. All of a sudden you need to look at it a little bit more, and then they need to have a little less clothing on, and then pretty soon they need to have no clothing on, and then pretty soon it needs to be a video, and pretty soon you're addicted to porn. Some of you love to shop. And you're like, oh no, Eric, just stick with the porn and the drinking, man. Come on, man. Don't go to my Amazon account. Come on. Some of you, it's social media. It calls, you obey. For some of you, it's food. It calls, you obey. It is the law of diminishing returns. See, the one, it leads to the other. But ultimately, with the law of diminishing returns, it has to be bigger, and it has to be brighter, and it has to be fancier, and it has to be more expensive, and it has to be more erotic. It undermines the one. And what begins as a pastime becomes a pathway. And that's why when you're over here on this road and it says, hey, come on over here, this is pleasure, this is immediate, it's right now. You can have it right now, and it's going to lead to happiness. And they're the most miserable people you will ever meet. And yet they're experiencing what we would say is ultimate pleasure. Why? It has become a pathway for them. So, Paul actually talked about this. And he says in Romans chapter 6, verse 16, don't you realize, this is Paul's way in our vernacular saying, really? Really? Don't you know? Don't you realize? It's like, you should know this. Don't you realize that you become the slave of whatever you choose to obey? You're like, Eric, no. See, I am choosing. It's not telling me, I'm choosing, and it's not telling me and then I obey it. I'm choosing it. Yeah, you choose it, and then you choose it, and choose it, and choose it, and you've chosen it so many times, you know what? You don't even know the difference. And now when it calls, could you not choose it? You've become a slave to whatever it is you choose to obey. It might be sin, it might not. Pleasure that may not be a sin at all, when it leads to the place where you are a slave to it, at that point it has become sin. When it has taken control of your life, you're like, but it's not controlling me. And yet you're hiding it, and if someone around you that already knows what's going on, if you ask them honestly to be honest, they may have a different thing. See, you can become a slave to sin. You choose whatever it is that you're going to obey. You could become a slave to sin, which leads to death. Sin always leads to death. It kills stuff. It has killed maybe your marriage. It kills friendships. It kills jobs. It kills churches. It kills families. Sin kills stuff. It makes it die. So you can become a slave to sin, and pleasure that you allow to go to a place where it becomes sin, maybe in its core it's not. And you have the capacity to enjoy it, but if you prioritize it over happiness and you allow it to become the master of you, at that point it is sin. And you can choose to obey it, and it will lead to death. Or you can choose to obey God, which leads to right living. It leads to righteous living. Righteous is just a big word that means right living, to do the right thing, to make the right decision. You know what it is. So to choose to obey God, which leads to righteous living, that leads to right living, will lead you to a place where you have peace with God, peace with yourself, and peace with others. That, my friends, is happiness. Could you imagine your family, the town that you live in? Could you imagine what this nation would be like if everyone had peace with God, peace with themselves, and peace with others? Do you think we would be a happy nation? A happy people? We know the answer to that, don't we? It's like, yeah, we would be. But see, there's some things, if we're going to get to this place where we prioritize happiness over pleasure, and the problem is, and one of the main reasons we don't prioritize it that way, is we do not like the fact that the principles of happiness are the law of the harvest, not the law of Pinocchio. You know what I'm talking about? The law of the harvest. In other words, you sow, and then you finally reap. But we want it now, because right now I'm having a bad day. Right now I need a little pick-me-up. Right now I need this little thing. And right now it's in the moment. I need immediate pleasure. And we will prioritize it then over happiness. And it leads us to a place where we will have neither. And we end up doing things that breaks our peace with God, breaks our peace with ourselves, and ultimately it breaks peace with other people. So if we're going to change this, I guarantee you, there's some things in your life that are going to need to come to a necessary end. You know what they are, don't you? And I'm just going to bring voice to it for you. It needs to come to a necessary end. Let me ask you an uncomfortable question. Is there a pleasure that's undermining your happiness? Is there a pleasure that's slowly taking you prisoner? What is it that needs to come to a necessary end? And guys, look up here. Girls, just talk amongst yourselves for a second. If you're online, guys, come on out in your boxers, whatever it is you got on. Come on out. Got to talk to you, okay? Come on. I know what it is like to be a guy. I are one. Okay? So here's the thing. Here's our typical guy response to this message. Yeah. I tuned in the wrong day for sure on this one. I need to do better. That's our fancy way of doing nothing. Doing nothing. Yeah, I need to do better. No, because here's the thing. This whole, when you prioritize pleasure and it needs to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, what you are doing, you have awoken an appetite in you. And here's the thing. If you're like, yeah, I need to do better. In fact, you might even come out of here and you're just like, I'm really gonna grit down. Now I'm gonna try. Because right now you have this easy emotion. It's like, yeah. But then you're going to go back, and here's what it's going to feel like. It's going to feel like you didn't have breakfast, and then you didn't have lunch, and at supper time, what's happening? Your body, what's your body telling you? Feed me. You're starving to death. You need to eat. That's exactly what's going to happen to you when you start, starving this appetite. It needs to come to a necessary end. But guys, we aren't very good at cutting back, are we? We're not very good at cutting back. We are way better at cutting it out. In its infancy and in moderation, it may not be sin, but I'm telling you what, if you think, I could just cut back a little, I'll do better. No, you won't. That appetite is going to come calling, and when it does, it is powerful. So here's the thing. If you really want to change this in your life, you know what it is that needs to come to a necessary end. You need to seek someone out, and you need to tell them what it is that needs to come to a necessary end in your life. And until you do, you will be undermining your own happiness. And you will be undermining your family. And you will be undermining potentially your children's family trees as well. So guys and gals, you know what? You're probably in the same boat. You probably need to do the same thing. What is it that needs to come to a necessary end? And are you willing to do what it takes? The only way that you get rid of an appetite is you starve it to death. You starve it to death. That's why I hear so many guys my age, and they drank and drank and drank and drank and drank and drank and drank, and now they're my age, and they start following Jesus, and it's kind of like, you know what? I just don't really need that anymore. And in fact, some of them are like, that's something, you know what? I realize in moderation, it's fine, it's not sin, it's fine, but not for me. I've had to just cut it out. I like me way better when I'm not purchasing all of that on Amazon. I like me way better when I'm not eating all of that. I like me way better when I'm not viewing those things I'm clicking on. And so I'm going to go to someone and I'm going to tell them what it is that needs to come to a necessary end. Because I want to begin to sow the principles that lead to happiness. And as a pastor, it's my desire for you. It's my desire for this church. I want you to experience both happiness and pleasure, but you gotta prioritize the principles of happiness that will lead to ultimate pleasure. You can't switch them around. So Crossing, let's be a church that's willing to walk with broken people because we are all broken. And let me pray for you that you would have the courage to make maybe a bold step of telling someone else a thing that needs to come to a necessary end for you. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, this could be a hard message to hear, but God, it could ultimately bring unbelievable freedom for some people. And so, God, I pray for all of us. For all of us, there's some things that need to come to a necessary end. God, the question is, will we have the courage to actually follow through with it, or will we just we need to do better, but then we're not going to do anything? And God, I thank you that even in the middle of a pandemic and even in the middle of just the weariness, that when we submit and apply the principles of happiness, we could be happy even through a really difficult time that our nation faces. So God, thank you for reminding us of that. We need this. And so we ask, God, for your courage and your help. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, thank you for joining us and being with us this week. One thing that I just wanted to mention right away was to remind you when Pastor Eric talked about encouraging those people that are on the front lines right now with kind of an upswing in COVID cases and if you have friends and family working in the hospitals or maybe in the schools. When you talked about that, a couple of people that I know personally came to mind. I thought, I'm going to get them a gift card so that they don't have to make a meal when they come home from their long shifts at work or their long days at school. So I would just encourage you, maybe ask God, who do you want to put on my mind to encourage in that way?
Good stuff.
So, yeah. One of the things that, as you were talking, and I think it was John 10:10, and when you said it was a life not ordinarily, what's the
Attained?
last? Attained,
Yeah.
yes. And when I really gave my life over to Christ in high school, it was because I was around, for the first time, a group of people that I really saw living that kind of life. And I thought, man, that is what I want to be, and that's how I want to live, so that people see that happiness in me.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about these things that take that we begin to obey them instead of us just choosing things that are enjoyable. The one that really caught my eye for me that I feel like God's convicting me on is the social media one. But I also wanted to talk on one that you and I were talking about that with our eyes and on social media a lot or just on screens, and how lust can take over for any of us, men and women. And so our family has recently joined it's not a filtering system, but it's called Covenant Eyes. And you talked about having somebody hold you accountable, and that ministry really is a way to hold each other accountable. So I wanted you to explain a little bit.
I love Covenant Eyes. Our family uses Covenant Eyes. The church uses Covenant Eyes, and we have like 15 devices, whether it's iPads or laptops or iMacs, any computer device. We have on Covenant Eyes, and what I love about Covenant Eyes is you can't get around it. And it's not really a filter. Some of you are like, I don't like filters because it slows it down. Right. So this is not a filter. Like, it'll let you go to something inappropriate. The thing is, it will send, if it'll flag it and then send it to your accountability partners. So like for me, one of my accountability partners for me personally is my wife. Well, that's a great.
That's two. Yeah.
So whatever I don't want to have sent to my wife. So here's the thing that I have observed. When I was growing up, there was kind of this view, if you just read your Bible enough and you were spiritual enough, you just didn't struggle with those things. And honestly, it's just wrong. It is so wrong. In fact, it's one of the reasons why it leads so many Christians to actually go into things they know they shouldn't go into, because it's shame-based. Very spiritual people understand they have the capacity to make dumb decisions. And our emotions sometimes, just lead us to where we're vulnerable. So having guardrails around us is a really biblical, spiritual, smart thing to do. And that's what Covenant Eyes does.
And like you just said, that it's not to not shame each other. And I even just think, as we can hold each other accountable, like, I'm just thinking about, God, how are you going to help me put guardrails around myself with social media? And just like we're doing that in our family, like we get each other's emails with Covenant Eyes. I know I can call on my husband to, hey, help me have some guardrails. And there's some great ways to do that practically. But just even for us, as we become accountable to each other, to not shame each other, but to encourage each other in this pursuit of godly happiness, of right living, that not ordinary life.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely not shame-based right living, because that will not lead you to happiness. But grace-based right living, um, having those priorities in the right order, definitely will lead you to have to be able to have both happiness and pleasure. And that's my desire for all of you.
So I encourage you just to take some time today and ask God, what is it that you want control over, and not let this thing have control over me. And then also, again, I just encourage you to think about who you can encourage, give them a little lift because of the heavy load that they're under, maybe a nurse or a doctor or somebody working the schools. So just encourage the community around today. Thank you.